You were never meant to hear this. They buried it beneath official records, behind stone walls and sealed basements, and even then, the whispers still bled through like poison under the skin. Newport, Rhode Island, 1867. A coastal town draped in salt and silence, but behind one blood-washed door stood a family, smiling, praying, grieving with you, while harvesting the dead for profit, pleasure, and power. This was not a crime of passion. It was a system. A family-run funeral home that served the city's most influential families, ministers, bankers, and judges, slowly became the epicenter of a hidden operation. What they discovered inside that house, when it all finally collapsed, shook even the most hardened investigators. And what they chose to never tell the public is what you're about to hear. Listen carefully. The Bellamy Funeral Establishment, a respected three-story Victorian home nestled on the edge of Brenton Cove, had handled over 600 burials in 13 years. Nearly all of them tied to a rise in unexplained illnesses, failed recoveries, and sudden deaths. But there was no disease. The family's patriarch, Reverend Elijah Bellamy, had built his empire on two things: grief and faith. He gave sermons on the sanctity of death, while cataloging the dying like livestock in a ledger kept beneath his chapel floorboards. His wife Esther played the role of spiritual comforter to the bereaved, though witnesses later described her as having eyes too calm around coffins. And the children? Don't be fooled. Lucien Bellamy was 17 when he made his first incision. Margaret, 15, was already mixing poisons in the attic by candlelight, poisons designed not to kill quickly, but to mimic natural death. Weak hearts, sudden fevers, painless sleep. By the time the townsfolk wept at the altar, the Bellamys had already bled them twice, once for their lives, and again for what they left behind. And the cellar? The cellar wasn't for storage. It was for study. Bones aligned like archives, organs floating in brine, and notes, hundreds of pages of notes, tracking symptoms, reactions, and death timelines like some morbid science project. This was not horror. This was research, a generational design for the perfect, undetectable death. They weren't just morticians. They were architects of mortality. And now you're hearing what you were never meant to know. By the time the Bellamys were questioned, most of the bodies had already rotted, buried beneath polished stones with epitaphs that meant nothing. But the patterns were there, hidden in plain sight. The same subtle illnesses, the same immaculate funerals, the same phrases murmured by Esther Bellamy as she clasped trembling hands. It was simply their time. Only it wasn't. Elijah Bellamy did not choose his victims randomly. He chose them with surgical precision. Widows with no children, sailors with no kin, lonely elders whose names had already begun to fade from the town's memory. He called them the Invisible. In his personal writings, retrieved from a fireproof chest sealed behind the chapel's stone hearth, he referred to them as the offering class. These were not murders. They were rituals. Each death was categorized, measured, evaluated, not for justice, but for efficacy. And then there were the hollow books. Bibles stacked in the chapel library, hollowed out and packed with vials, each labeled with numbers instead of names. 17.3, a slow paralytic. 22.9, a sleeping tonic turned lethal. 41.4, causes seizures and short-term memory loss. These weren't just poisons. They were tools, refined through years of experimentation, tested on real people, and no one suspected. Because Reverend Bellamy wasn't just a preacher. He was a pillar. He baptized their children. He buried their dead. He stood beside the mayor during town ceremonies, led Sunday vigils, and hosted charitable dinners in the very room where he'd once drained a boy's blood into ceramic bowls. This wasn't a family gone mad overnight. It was a slow corruption, a deliberate descent into darkness cloaked in lace curtains and scripture. Even their hymns carried hidden meanings. One neighbor later recalled how the Bellamy children sang a song with strange Latin verses at dusk. When translated, it wasn't a prayer, it was a warning. To serve death is to become unseen. When the cellar was finally raided, there were 39 labeled jars, each containing a piece of someone never officially reported missing. And on the back wall, scrawled in a child's handwriting, the phrase, "We only take what won't be missed. You think you're safe because you're seen? Because you have family?" The Bellamys didn't need fear. They needed indifference. And in a town built on silence, indifference was in infinite supply. There was one man who saw through it all. But by the time he spoke, it was already too late. His name was Dr. Alton Greaves, a Civil War medic turned small-town physician. He'd seen enough death to know what it looked like when it came naturally, and what it looked like when it was manufactured. Greaves had no interest in superstition or gossip. He trusted science, blood patterns, toxicology, and what he saw inside the Bellamy funeral home defied everything he understood about ethics and evil. His first suspicion came in spring of 1866. A 9-year-old boy named Elias Carrington, healthy, full of energy, suddenly collapsed during a church service. The cause? Respiratory failure, claimed Elijah Bellamy, who just so happened to be seated directly behind the boy when he died. Greaves examined the body. No fluid in the lungs, no swelling, no signs of trauma. But inside the boy's coat pocket was a sugar wafer wrapped in linen. When Greaves had it tested in his modest lab, he found belladonna, in trace amounts, but enough to stop a child's heart. He took his findings to the town council. They dismissed him. Because the Bellamys were good people, because the town was small, because questioning the dead meant questioning the living, and nobody wanted to look under that rock. Greaves knew then. Newport wasn't just afraid. It was owned, and its owners were embalming the truth. But Greaves didn't stop. He began collecting his own records, quietly, meticulously. He charted the deaths, cross-referenced them against medical logs, cataloged the poisons used most often by morticians, and then he began watching the Bellamys. He noticed the deliveries, small crates from a Boston apothecary that never showed up on ledgers. He noticed the rituals, how Margaret Bellamy would visit the cemetery at night, alone, carrying nothing, and returning with soil under her fingernails. He noticed how the cellar windows had been boarded up from the inside, how the smoke from their chimney never ceased, even in the summer months. And worst of all, he noticed how every time he brought up the subject with townspeople, someone else died within the week. 3 deaths, then 4, then 6. He wasn't just exposing a lie, he was stepping into a machine, an industrialized, generational system built to devour dissent. And the deeper he looked, the more he realized he was no longer the doctor. He was the next patient. Dr. Alton Greaves knew he couldn't go to the authorities. Not in Newport. Not when the coroner was Elijah Bellamy's cousin. Not when the mayor's wife had her mother embalmed in the Bellamy cellar just 2 weeks prior. Not when every family in town had, at one point, accepted death from the hands of this family, and felt grateful for it. Truth had no allies here. So Greaves did what men of conscience do when the walls close in. He started writing. He called it the Newport Ledger of Decay, a handwritten, forbidden medical journal that catalogued every suspicious death in Newport since 1854. Each entry included time of death, symptoms, location of treatment, burial date, and the final caretaker. Of the 112 deaths logged, 97 were Bellamy handled. He began cross-referencing the types of poisons known to be used in mortuary practices: arsenic, formaldehyde, aconite, curare, and compared them to the symptoms reported on death certificates. The match rate was damning. And then Greaves made the mistake that nearly cost him his life. He gave a copy of the ledger to the town's only printer, a man named Thaddeus Moore, whose shop was known for discretion. Within 48 hours, Moore's shop was burned to the ground. Within 72, Moore was dead. "Accidental fall from attic steps," said the report. Only Greaves saw the bruising pattern around his neck. That wasn't a fall. That was a warning. The Bellamys had eyes everywhere, and now they had Greaves's scent. The next night he found a blood-stained doll on his doorstep. Porcelain, red dress, blue eyes, no note, Just a silent message. We know where your daughter sleeps. He sent his family away the next morning, by train, unmarked carriage, disguised destination, and then he vanished. The townspeople whispered that he'd gone mad, driven to insanity by his obsession with the dead. Others claimed they saw him boarding a ship under a false name. A few believed he never left at all, that the Bellamys preserved him, dissected him, buried his bones beneath their garden roses. But one thing is certain. A month after Greaves disappeared, the deaths slowed, and 3 weeks after that, they stopped completely. Why? Because something was coming, something that frightened even the family who fed on fear. The silence was not peace. It was calculation. For 21 days, the Bellamy household was still. No funerals, no public appearances, no smoke from the chimney. The mortuary gates remained locked. The air around the estate changed, no longer humming with morbid ritual, but waiting, watching. The town of Newport, too, grew quiet, as if the entire place was holding its breath, knowing something had ruptured in the dark. And then, the exhumations began. Not officially, not by law, but by blood. A group of 6 men, sons, brothers, husbands of the deceased, broke into the cemetery at night with lanterns, shovels, and prayers trembling on their lips. The plan was desperate. Dig up the last 5 Bellamy funerals and verify what the rumors whispered. That the bodies weren't at peace. That they weren't even whole. The first grave, Martha Lane, age 28, was empty. The second, Tobias Grigg, age 72, contained no body, only teeth. The third, a child, Clara Withers, age 5, was intact, but her organs were gone, removed with surgical precision. No signs of decomposition, no odor, preserved in a way even nature didn't recognize. By the 4th grave, 2 of the men vomited. 1 fled and never returned, but the rest kept digging. At the 5th and final grave, something changed. The coffin was heavy, too heavy. When they pried it open, they didn't find a corpse. They found a mannequin, wrapped in cloth soaked with formaldehyde, and stitched into its hollow chest was a brass box. Inside that box was a journal. 1 page, 1 sentence. If you found this, then we know you came looking, and now we're coming too. That same night, fires erupted across Newport. The blacksmith's barn, the schoolhouse roof, the church belfry. And as the flames danced, a shadow moved through the smoke, a figure in black, face veiled, holding a lantern that glowed green. Witnesses swore the fires bowed in her presence, that the heat receded where she stepped. One child, hiding beneath the porch, claimed he saw her eyes, not human, not animal, just endless. The Bellamys were never seen again. Their home stood vacant for a decade until the town voted to tear it down. But no matter how many men they sent, no hammer ever broke those walls. The demolition crew arrived on a gray October morning. 8 men, all outsiders, brought in from Providence under strict instructions. Tear the place down to the foundation, burn the debris, salt the earth. Paid in cash, no questions asked. The town didn't want answers. It wanted obliteration. But within the first hour, the foreman, Jacob Hunt, knew something was wrong. The tools broke. First the crowbars, snapped like dry twigs, then the axes, heads flying off handles. The men tried torches, sledgehammers, even gunpowder, but the walls of the Bellamy house absorbed it all. No cracks, no splinters, just silence, thick and unmoved, like the house was watching them suffer. On the second day, one of the workers disappeared. He had gone to the cellar alone, muttering that the bricks looked too clean. He never came back. No scream, no struggle, just gone. They found his hammer on the cellar steps, still warm, as if he had just let go. By the 3rd day, the rest of the crew refused to enter the house. so Hunt did it himself. What he saw beneath the floorboards never made it into the final report. But he told his wife before he died. He found tunnels, dozens of them, hollowed beneath the house like veins, branching into chambers filled with surgical tables, jars of preserved flesh, handwritten maps of Newport with houses circled in red, and in the center of it all was a wall of faces, not drawings, not masks. Actual human faces, skinned, dried, preserved like trophies, each one tagged with a date, a name, a Bible verse, and beneath it all, in blood-red chalk, a single phrase repeated over and over, "In death they listen." Hunt ran. The next morning, the Bellamy house was found engulfed in flames. No one saw who lit it, no one heard it fall. But when the ashes cooled and the rubble was sifted, they found not a single bone. Not from the workers, not from the Bellamys, not even from the animals once kept on the property. Just one thing survived, the foundation stone, carved with a family motto, "From ash we rise." Newport thought it was over, but evil doesn't die. It relocates. 22 years passed. Newport rebuilt. The field where the Bellamy house once stood became a park. Children played there, unknowingly tracing the outline of what had been a mortuary, a tomb, a temple of something older than law. Time buried the story, but not the truth, because the evil hadn't been destroyed. It had transferred. In 1889, a new family arrived. The Greaves. A quiet couple with twin sons and a third child, a girl who never spoke. They claimed to be from Vermont, but no one in the town registry found a trace of them. No birth records, no marriage license, just a notarized deed, stamped and paid in full, for a pristine 3-story home built right on the park's edge, where the Bellamy walls had once refused to fall. It wasn't long before things began happening again. At first, it was small. Cats vanished. Dogs refused to pass the Greaves' gates. Children reported hearing singing late at night, a woman's voice humming lullabies from underneath the soil. Then came the fog. Every Sunday, for 7 weeks straight, the entire neighborhood would wake to a thick mist clinging to their windows, inside their homes, under their beds, as if the air itself were crawling with memory. And with the fog came the dreams. People described the same recurring nightmare, standing in a hallway of wood and smoke, walking barefoot through blood, pursued by whispers speaking in reverse Latin. No one understood the words, but they all remembered the smell. Formaldehyde. One man, a preacher named Ellis Rourke, attempted to confront the Greaves. He went alone. He never returned, but his Bible was found on the Greaves' porch the next morning, open to the book of Ezekiel, a single verse circled in black ink. "I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee." That same week, 3 children went missing. Their shoes were discovered arranged in a triangle at the base of an old willow tree in the park, the exact spot where the Bellamy embalming room once stood. Inside each shoe was a note. All 3 read the same thing. "The house remembers," and it did. Because beneath the Greaves' new home, a basement had been added, but it hadn't been built. It had been uncovered. The basement beneath the Greaves' house wasn't listed in the building plans. City records showed a standard crawl space, barely 2 feet deep, but when the property was quietly surveyed after the family vanished in 1891, inspectors discovered something altogether different, something impossible. A full labyrinth. Stonework too old for the house above, walls blackened not by fire, but by time, ceilings lined with hooks, floors etched with symbols not found in any known language, and at its center, once again, a chamber, identical to the one Jacob Hunt had described decades earlier. But this time, there was something new. A spiral staircase. Descending far below sea level, carved from obsidian and bone, with no bottom in sight. Those who entered claimed they could hear music. Not from any instrument known to man, a low, pulsing thrum, like a choir underwater. Each step downward brought new hallucinations, faces in the walls, whispers inside the mind, memories that didn't belong to them. One man swore he saw himself as a child, lying on a table, being stitched together by shadowed hands. He had no scars on his body, but afterward he would scream every night for the rest of his life, begging someone to take the needles out. The authorities tried to seal the place. They filled it with concrete, bricked off the entry, planted trees and called it a garden. But in the years that followed, nothing grew there. No grass, no weeds, not even moss. The soil remained dark, dry, and hot to the touch, even in winter. A local historian, Miriam Ward, attempted to document it all. She pieced together oral testimonies, drawings, even old Bellamy photographs kept in forgotten trunks. She believed the tunnel system beneath Newport was older than the town itself, a remnant of some pre-colonial sect that worshipped death as consciousness itself. She published a paper. It was laughed at. She was found drowned in her bathtub 2 weeks later, mouth stuffed with rose petals, eyes replaced with coins from 1812. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle, just a final journal entry written in her own hand. They live between the floorboards of history, feeding on what we forget. And the spiral still remains, buried, silent, breathing, waiting for the next family to move in. By 1895, the town of Newport had changed. The old families, the ones who had lived there for generations, began to leave, quietly, without sale notices, without goodbyes. Their homes were boarded up or passed to distant cousins who never arrived. It was as if something unseen had worn them down. The newcomers who replaced them were different. Investors, industrial men, people with no ties to the soil. They looked at Newport and saw potential. Railroad expansion, sea trade, tourism, but they didn't see the cracks beneath the paint. One of these men was Thomas Varelli, a wealthy railroad tycoon from Boston, sharp suit, shined shoes, and a god complex big enough to build a mansion where the Bellamy home once stood, brick for brick, stone for stone, as if taunting the past. He called it Villa Lumen. An irony no one missed. Varelli moved in with his wife and 2 children, servants, security. He even installed electric lighting, the first home in the county to do so. The place glowed like a lighthouse in the fog. Locals avoided it. Birds didn't perch on its roof. Even the sea seemed to recoil from its docks. Still, Varelli was unbothered. For 6 months he held parties, hosted senators, and laughed at superstition, until the night of his daughter's piano recital. It was supposed to be a simple evening. Guests arrived, champagne poured. His daughter Eloise sat at the grand piano, fingers poised over ivory keys. But when she played, the sound that came out wasn't music. It was screaming, a chorus of agony, male, female, children, old men, dozens of voices. Some guests fell to their knees weeping, others clawed at their ears. One woman gouged her own eyes out with a butter knife, whispering, "They're behind the mirrors." Eloise collapsed. Her fingers were broken, every knuckle dislocated, shattered from the inside as if played by something else. She ever spoke again. A week later, the housekeeper slit her own throat in the greenhouse, leaving only one note scrawled in dirt on the glass. She didn't invite them. She played them. Varelli sealed the piano, burned it in the courtyard, but each night afterward the music returned, not from instruments, from walls, from drains, from the whispering mouths of his sleeping children. And just before he disappeared, he wrote a single sentence in his ledger: "The spiral isn't a place, it's a sound." By the turn of the century, whispers of the spiral had moved from drunken tavern tales to something else, academic interest. Not public, of course, but quiet letters exchanged between certain professors, theologians, and asylum directors began to circulate across the East Coast. One name came up again and again: Dr. Elias Rowan. A former surgeon turned psychiatrist, Rowan had served as chief administrator of Cranford Institute for the Deranged in Providence, just 40 miles from Newport. His methods were brutal by modern standards, but he was respected, even feared. He believed madness was not a disease but a kind of signal interference, a tuning gone wrong. His patients didn't hallucinate. They received transmissions. Rowan claimed that in his final years at Cranford, he encountered dozens of patients, unconnected by geography or family, who described the same spiral staircase. Always descending, always singing, always watching. They called it the throat of God. Rowan became obsessed. He resigned from the institute and moved into the woods outside Newport, where he built a small cabin atop what he believed to be a geological echo chamber, a place where the veil was thin and perception could bleed. He dug and dug. Neighbors reported strange lights, chanting, screams that began low like thunder and ended in glass-shattering pitches. One hunter swore he saw Rowan walking through the forest with no skin, smiling with teeth made of quartz. In 1904, a team of academics from Yale arrived unannounced. They brought instruments, phonographs, and a letter of invitation that Rowan denied ever sending. They found no cabin, just scorched earth, a perfect spiral in the dirt 40 feet across, and at its center, a phonograph cylinder still spinning. What it contained has been studied by only a handful of people. It was never made public, but one of the Yale professors, Jonathan Kell, published a paper 2 years later, anonymously, titled Linguistic Interference Patterns in Non-Euclidean Sound Structures. The paper suggested that certain frequencies, when layered with intent, could rewire perception, making a listener see things not present in the room or within themselves. The implication was devastating. Sound was not just vibration, it was architecture. It could build temples inside your mind, body, and or prisons. And the spiral, it wasn't underground. It was inside us, waiting to be heard. You were never meant to hear this. That's why every attempt to expose it ends in disappearance, madness, or discredit, because this isn't a myth buried in some forgotten town. This is infrastructure, a system older than America, older than religion, built into the walls of society like mold behind the paint. The Bellamys were just one node, the Greaves another. The spiral isn't a family curse. It's a framework, a method, a ritual disguised as routine. And if you think it's over, look closer at the patterns around you. Every town has a funeral home no one questions. Every city has an institution where screams are silenced by policy. Every generation has stories that vanish, not because they were never true, but because truth is too dangerous to keep on the surface. Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room and felt it breathing? Not the air, the walls, that subtle shift in pressure, that moment when your skin tightens but you don't know why, when the light seems too still, the silence too perfect. That's not fear, that's memory, the house remembering you. Because here's the secret no one dares to say, these structures aren't haunted, they're alive, and they're not remnants of the past. They're vessels, they collect, they catalog, they replicate. Every prayer whispered in panic, every breath taken near death, every lie told to preserve innocence. It's all absorbed, and it shapes the next iteration. The reason the Bellamy house couldn't be destroyed wasn't superstition. It was design. A perfect geometry of grief and control. You want to understand why no one could prove anything? Why the journals vanished? Why the witnesses went mad or mute? Because this knowledge was built to infect, not to be survived. And now that you're listening, now that these words are crawling into the wet folds of your subconscious, you've already stepped onto the staircase. There's no going back. But if you've made it this far, you're not ordinary. You're not asleep. You're part of them now. So comment below to lock it in. The spiral sees me. The spiral sees me. Say it twice. For balance. Say it once. For the man you used to be. And again. For the one you're becoming. Because knowledge like this, it doesn't come free. Let's talk about the numbers. 13 missing girls, 9 unnamed corpses, 7 Bellamy sons dead before the age of 25, 2 entire census entries missing, 1 funeral home, never burned, never sold, never explained. You want to believe these are coincidences. You want to cling to the rational, to the comfort of statistics. But the truth is, arithmetic was never neutral, not in Newport, not in that house. Because what if numbers don't count people, but mark them? Every disappearance tied to the Bellamy home fell on a lunar apex. Not random. Calculated. Tracked against the Callaway calendar, an arcane system used by coastal cults to time rituals of transitional harvesting. Harvests of what, you ask? Not crops, not livestock, but human essence, taken at the point between breath and silence. In 1917, the U.S. military quietly investigated a surge in enlistment desertions traced to a recruiting office 1 block from the Bellamy property. Dozens of men disappeared after their medical exams. No records, no bodies, just uniforms folded and placed neatly at the base of the spiral staircase inside the home. And the investigator sent to uncover the truth? Major Clifton Royce, later diagnosed with schizophrenia. His final report was 93 pages of unpunctuated glyphs, mathematical notations, and the word open written 3 and 14 times. They sealed the report, classified it. Then they promoted him, posthumously. Even now, historians argue about whether the house was a nexus point or a machine. But here's what no one contests. The Bellamy family had influence. They sat on bank boards, on school councils. They donated to churches and hospitals, every institution that handles the fragile moments in life. Birth, death, faith, fear. And all those donations? They were receipts, not generosity. A purchase of silence, a transaction for access. Because when you own the door between this world and what lies beneath, you don't need an army. You need a funeral home. And now, over a century later, people still avoid the street, still cross themselves when they pass the ruins, still report dreams of black stairs and a voice humming a lullaby they've never heard in waking life. But once you hear it, you never forget the tune. There's something no one ever tells you about evil. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It seeps. It seeps into wood, into words, into rituals disguised as routine. And in the case of the Bellamy house, it seeped into the bones of the town itself. You see, the spiral staircase wasn't just architecture, it was a map. Carved with exact ratios tied to ancient death rites, Mesopotamian, Druidic, Masonic, each step engraved on the underside with an obscure glyph, visible only under blood or moonlight. It wasn't meant to lead up or down. It was designed to pull you inward, to disassemble you, piece by piece. You don't climb it, you offer yourself to it. Records show that by 1871, over 42 children in Newport had vanished, all within a 5-block radius of the Bellamy home. The town blamed gypsies, then vagrants, then fever dreams. But one midwife's journal, smuggled out before her sudden death, listed the dates of the disappearances, matched perfectly with the phases of a spiral etched in her cellar floor. She called it the calling. She wrote, "I heard them whispering through the drains. The children, not crying, singing." They found her with her ears stuffed full of rosary beads. And it didn't stop there. Newport's water table is unstable, or so the government claims, which is why maps of the sewer system changed 6 times in 10 years, and surveyors refused to return after reporting movement in the pipes. Movement, as if the house had roots. And maybe it did, because when researchers brought ground-penetrating radar to the Bellamy ruins in 2003, they found something else: rooms. Beneath the foundation. No doors, no stairs, just rooms, hexagonal, damp, and empty. Except for one. Room 6. Inside, an antique cradle swaying, as if someone had just stepped away, and no wind in the chamber, just the cradle, and a spiral scratched into the flow, or dug deep through stone into soil that was black as night. Even now, some say the spiral still grows, like a fungus feeding off memory, off fear, off attention. So you have a choice. Keep watching or close your eyes. But understand this, you're already inside the house. The family that moved into the Bellamy house in 1867 never left. Not in the way you think. The Pembrokes were quiet, God-fearing, moved from Boston to escape scandal. Something about a sister's child born with no eyes, no tongue, no sound when it cried. They came to Newport with promises of peace, but within weeks, neighbors noticed the smell. It wasn't rot. It was something worse, sterile, like scorched iron, like a hospital that had been burned to erase the evidence. Mrs. Pembroke, once lively, stopped speaking entirely. She would sit in the garden for hours staring at a single rose bush. The petals were black, not wilted, black. When asked about it, she'd only whisper, "It sings when no one's near." Her husband, Elias, began building at night, hammering from dusk till dawn. Neighbors swore they saw him dragging sacks into the cellar, soaked and squirming. When confronted, he said nothing, just smiled and tapped his temple twice, like a man who'd solved a puzzle only he could see. Then the children changed. 2 daughters, 1 son, all under 10. Seen walking in perfect unison, not blinking, not breathing, some claimed. One rainy night, a constable was dispatched to check on them. He never made it past the front gate. Was found the next morning hanging upside down from the archway, blood pooled in a perfect spiral below his head. His tongue had been replaced with a doll's shoe. His pockets were filled with teeth, not his own. The Pembrokes were never questioned. Why? Because the town was changing too. Sermons turned cryptic. Schools taught children to chant in unfamiliar meters. The town's clock tower stopped keeping time, instead chiming at irregular, nauseating intervals. And every night at 3:17 a.m., a single light would flicker in the cellar window of the Bellamy house, even after the property was condemned. What lived there wasn't the Pembrokes anymore. They had been rewritten by something ancient, something that doesn't speak in words or symbols, something that programs reality like a composer, using your fears as notes and your memories as tempo. They say the house still remembers them, that if you visit on the anniversary of the day they vanished, June 6, 1869, and stand perfectly still at the center of the garden at 3:17 a.m., you'll hear a woman humming, and then you'll see 3 children, smiling, standing behind you. You'll find no record of the Pembroke children ever being born, not in the census, not in church logs, not in death certificates. It's as if they were conjured, like props in a play written by something beneath the floorboards of history. Yet dozens of townsfolk remember them. Not fondly, not clearly, but with the kind of terror that freezes in your stomach like old lead. What's worse, their drawings remained. Scattered through the house, etched on the walls, stitched into the underside of pillows, carved into the bark of the black rose bush. Each showed the same scene. A man with no face, standing at the foot of their beds, always the same time in the corner, 3:17 a.m. Always the same title written beneath in red chalk, "The One Who Chooses." One investigator, a defrocked priest named Avery Kane, attempted to document the house before the government sealed it off. He entered with 5 loaded Bibles, 3 crucifixes, and 2 rosaries. He came out 7 hours later with no eyes and a note jammed in his mouth that read, "You brought the wrong scriptures." Kane spent the rest of his life scribbling symbols in a sanitarium. The symbols matched none from any known language. Until one day, in 1972, a linguist working in Algeria uncovered an identical set of symbols carved into a stone child's skull, buried beneath an abandoned French orphanage. The language? Still untranslatable. But the pattern was clear. A summoning dialect. Not for a spirit, but for a presence that rearranges causality itself. It doesn't need to kill you. It just rewrites you. People in Newport began to change after the Pembrokes vanished. Their memories didn't align. Parents remembered children that never existed. Some had injuries that no medical record accounted for. One man claimed he had been dead for 3 years and had simply come back to finish what he started. And Alwa, his always, they spoke of the cellar, sealed with iron, screaming with silence. When federal agents finally sealed the house, they poured concrete down the entire lower floor. But concrete can't erase geometry, and some say that on windless nights, if you kneel on the front porch and press your ear to the wood, you'll hear pages turning, and children laughing, and a voice whispering through the cracks. We never left. We only learned how to hide. There are things more dangerous than ghosts. Patterns are one of them. By 1869, 2 years after the Pembrokes disappeared, the town of Newport was not merely haunted, it was infected. Events began repeating. People fell into loops, unexplainable repetitions of behavior that defied time and memory. Mrs. Greta Albright, for instance, baked the same blackberry pie every Thursday. Nothing unusual, until someone noticed she'd been doing it for 13 years, wearing the same dress, using the same spoiled berries, and talking to a child that didn't exist. When they asked her why, she simply said, "He still hasn't come home from the funeral." There was no funeral. There was no child. But there was a pie, always warm, always steaming, always bleeding. Another man, Chester Boyle, ran the town's lone barber shop. He shaved the same customer 3 times a day. The man's name was never spoken. The chair was always stained with something dark and iridescent. When asked about it, Boyle said, "He doesn't like to look messy when he goes back underground." Underground. That word came up again and again. And behind all of it, the same symbol began appearing, scratched into school desks, inked behind ears, burned into tree trunks behind the funeral home. A circle within a circle, with 8 jagged teeth. Historians ignored it, psychologists dismissed it, but the survivors, they all called it the same thing, the maw, a hunger that wasn't metaphorical, a logic that devours reason. By now, Washington had dispatched Agency 7, a division so covert it officially does not exist. Their job wasn't investigation, it was containment. Their solution? Excise Newport from all maps, burn county records, erase references in textbooks, and most importantly, seal the source. The Pembroke funeral home was entombed in black salt, encased in copper mesh, and declared condemned due to structural instability. But buildings don't bleed. And yet, on rainy days that house weeps. Thick, dark liquid trickles from its eaves, and if you touch it, you won't bleed, you'll remember. Not your own life, but someone else's. Someone whose face doesn't make sense in the mirror. Someone who died screaming beneath a town that doesn't exist anymore. Yet you'll crave their memories, because yours will start slipping. It wasn't just the town that changed, it was the people. And not in the way grief changes people. This was transfiguration, slow, creeping, irreversible. The survivors of the Pembroke curse, those who lived near the funeral home, those who buried their dead through its doors, began to exhibit peculiar traits, not physical deformities, psychological mutations. Reverend Thorne, the town's last preacher, once delivered sermons that stirred the soul, but after 1868, he began preaching to empty pews, and something else. He said, "They are listening from beneath. They love the sound of regret." One Sunday, he walked into the church basement and never returned. Weeks later, parishioners heard a deep knocking under the altar. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. That rhythm continued for 19 years. Then it stopped. Children were the first to be taken, not abducted, not murdered. Something worse. They simply began to mirror. Mirror what exactly? The adults? No. They mirrored things not present. Young Clara Bishop would respond to commands no one gave. She'd wake up at 3:12 a.m. sharp, face the northwest corner of her room, and chant something not even linguists could identify. When recorded, the tapes would erase themselves. One school teacher, Miss Letty Dawes, wrote in her journal, "The children know things we have no language for. They laugh before tragedy strikes. They draw the future in chalk and forget doing so." She disappeared in spring. Her shoes were found in the school bell tower. Her voice was not. By 1870, the town had been emptied. Some fled, some vanished, some turned on each other. But the Pembroke house remained, untouched, feeding. Locals reported seeing faces in the upper windows, never the same, never blinking, just watching, waiting. Agency 7 returned, not to contain, but to excavate. They claimed something ancient was under the house. Not a crypt, not a tunnel, but a mouth, a living hollow in the earth, a chamber of bone and memory. No report was filed after that. The team disappeared. The agency shut down the project. And now, the Pembroke name has been erased from every federal record, every registry, every obituary list. But you know what can't be erased? Memory. Especially the ones that aren't yours. Especially when they begin to wake up inside you. There's a reason why no one builds on that land. No tourists, no developers, not even the desperate. Newport has rebranded itself. It wears the gloss of coastal charm now. Cafes, yacht clubs, smiling brochures. But beneath the pavement of that seaside fantasy, the ground still breathes. Locals don't speak of the Pembrokes, not out of fear, but because they can't. Their tongues stumble, their memories glitch. It's like the family is not only gone, but forbidden. This isn't superstition, it's programming. A classified memorandum dated 1922, uncovered from an estate sale in Providence, contains the following line. Operation Latchkey, Memory Interdiction Initiative. Pembroke Site, Code Black. Autonomous resistance to recollection confirmed. Subject townsfolk exhibit cortical dampening and visual negation. This isn't folklore, it's engineered amnesia. But the few who remember, always remember in dreams. There's a common nightmare. A funeral parlor hallway stretching infinitely. Rooms with closed doors on either side. And from each door, whispers, scratching, children crying. You reach the final door. You open it. Inside, there's a mirror. You see yourself, only older, tired, terrified. And standing just behind you, barely visible, the Pembroke matriarch. Always the mother, pale, still, smiling. Some wake up screaming. Others don't wake up at all. In 1956, a historian named Walter Kearns published a short article in a forbidden journal titled Structures of Psychic Decay, Sites of National Trauma. In the final footnote, he names only one American location that matches the energy signatures found in pre-Islamic Mesopotamian blood ritual sites. He wrote, Newport, Rhode Island, the Pembroke home. The structure was not a house, it was a container, and the family, custodians of a breach between human grief and something else. Walter was institutionalized 3 days after publication. The journal disappeared. But survivors say that sometimes, when the tide pulls out just right, you can hear the sound of a wooden drawer sliding open, followed by a child's voice whispering. Next, the archives of the Newport Daily Herald once held a single article titled, Death is a Family Business, behind the doors of the Pembroke parlor. It never saw print. Why? Because the reporter who wrote it, Thomas Ellery, vanished 2 days before it went to press. All that remains is a half-burned draft recovered from a trash barrel behind the newspaper office. In it he writes, the Pembrokes are not undertakers in the traditional sense. They don't bury the dead, they transform them. They store them. And worse, there's no indication they ever charged anyone for their services. Pause there. No billing records, no payment logs, no client receipts. Hundreds of bodies passed through their home, and no paper trail. Not even requests from grieving families. Because the families didn't grieve. There were no funeral announcements, not one. The town's population decreased, but no one asked why. It's as if the people who died were not remembered, not mourned, not even missed. What does that suggest? These weren't just murders, they were erasures. People wiped clean from emotional memory, not simply removed from the earth, but removed from meaning. Ellery's final words before the page scorches black. The family has a ledger. It is not of names, but of rituals. Dates, moon phases, skin temperatures. Children aged 6 to 9, always multiples, always twins. Then another pattern emerged. Every 19 years, starting from 1805, a series of simultaneous disappearances occurred across the northeastern United States. always in threes, always at midnight. The year 1867, when the Pembroke home was raided, was one of those years. But unlike the others, that cycle didn't go quiet. Instead, something broke. A ritual was interrupted. A breach was left open. Some researchers believe the Pembroke home wasn't just the site of killings. It was an anchor point. A geographic nexus designed to harvest the spiritual weight of death and concentrate it, not for power, but for feeding. Feeding what? In 1872, 5 years after the raid, an unmarked package arrived at the Newport Historical Society. Inside it, a book wrapped in aged, yellowing velvet. No title, no author, only a note. Do not open unless the black moon rises again. The curator shelved it under occult curiosities, never catalogued, never displayed. But in 1911, the night of another black moon, it disappeared. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints. Only a single black feather left behind. Some said it was a raven's. Others insisted it was something older. Extinct. This book, according to those who glimpsed its pages, was not written in English, not in Latin, but in a language no scholar could decipher. A mix of symbols, bone sketches, and anatomical diagrams that appeared to shift when viewed too long. A living book. It's believed the Pembrokes used this tome to guide their practices. But it wasn't a spell book. It was a manual for embalming the soul. The funeral home's hidden basement revealed a strange discovery. A central room with 13 glass coffins, each containing a perfectly preserved child, eyes open, no decay. Their expressions weren't of fear, but awareness, as if they had been placed in a state beyond sleep. A waiting room between life and something unspeakable. Here's the most horrifying part. Each coffin had an inscription, not names, not dates, but instructions, etched in gold leaf under the lids. Instructions for what to do when the host returns. And that word, host, appears in nearly every page of the missing book. Host, as in a body for something that doesn't belong here. Not demonic, not ghostly, but parasitic. We're no longer talking about serial murder. We're talking about biological vessels. Flesh used as keys. Keys to open something older than religion, deeper than evil. That's why the Pembrokes never tried to hide. They weren't escaping just dice. They were fulfilling purpose. One that may not have ended when the house was boarded up. One that may only be dormant. The number 2025 had been etched into a cornerstone hidden beneath the old funeral home. Not in Roman numerals, but in a script identical to the one in the missing book. Symbols twisting in upon themselves, as if alive. Researchers dismissed it as graffiti, but they didn't see what was behind it. A sealed vault, untouched for over 150 years. Inside, 13 wax effigies. Each one modeled after a child buried in Newport during the Pembroke era. Hair real, skin pliable. Hearts still beating, hooked to nothing. In 1997, a team of forensic anthropologists opened the vault under government supervision. It was supposed to be archived, documented, and closed. But the recordings never released. 3 team members disappeared. One went blind. Another, the lead researcher, was later institutionalized, babbling in fragments of the same unknown tongue found in the book. When asked what happened, she only repeated one phrase: "The host remembers." Now here's where the timeline gets disturbing. Every 39 years, Newport experiences a rash of unexplained child disappearances. Same pattern, same age group, same lunar cycle: 67, 1906, 1945, 1984, and next, 2023, 2025. The local authorities deny any link. But the families? They speak of dreams, of children waking up whispering names they've never heard. Margaret, Joseph, the Black Father. These were Pembroke names. So is it starting again? That's the forbidden theory. That what the Pembrokes began was never finished, that they were merely caretakers of an older process, a cyclical harvesting of vessels, not for ritual, not for malice, but to house something foreign, something that feeds on memory, and burrows deep into the psyche until the host forgets they were ever human. Here, at the end of the descent, we arrive not at clarity, but at the edge of the void itself. Everything you've heard, everything that was buried, locked, sealed, and denied, leads here. The Pembrokes were not unique. They were part of something wider, older, transcontinental. In the 1700s, similar funeral practices appeared in rural Bavaria, southern Sudan, and northern Tibet, all involving preparation of the dead for return rather than rest. Same glyphs, same language, same whispered names. Margaret Pembroke's diary, recovered from a London collector in 2011, contains a line scribbled in fevered ink. "Our home is not a home, it is a corridor, and we were only the doorkeepers." There's a theory among fringe historians called the corridor hypothesis that certain bloodlines act as vessels, not genetically, psychologically, carriers of psychic architecture designed to maintain continuity across lifetimes for something else. The Pembrokes weren't a family, they were a design. Funeral homes in the 1800s weren't just for the grieving. They were laboratories, places to test what remains of the human soul after death and what can occupy the hollow space left behind. Modern-day Newport now sits atop more than 40 sealed catacombs, none charted on public maps. Every attempt to excavate ends in failure. Equipment breaks, permits denied, crews refuse to return. Local legend says if you go deep enough, you'll find a second version of the town beneath the real one. Same streets, same homes, but twisted, lifeless, inverted, and at its center, a chapel made of glass, where every pew is occupied by those who were buried but never stayed dead. So here's the final question, the one no historian, priest, or politician dares to answer. If the Pembroke funeral home was only one door, how many others were built? And more importantly, which ones are still open? This is not just history. This is a map of power, cloaked in tragedy and silence. You weren't supposed to know, but now you do. And once you know, you can't go back.